On today's video, we're going to get a tour of the east coast of the United States from Canada all the way down to the Florida Keys. Our tour starts in Quebec City, Canada, which is on the St. Lawrence River. From here, we're going to head south into Maine and then drive along Interstate 95 all the way down to the Florida Keys. Getting a complete tour of the east coast of North America. Along the way, we'll discover quaint towns, large cities, and beautiful scenic views. As we head south towards the coastline of Maine, we discover some of the most beautiful pine forests in North America. The state of Maine is heavily forested, and its natural beauty expands far out from the coastline. As we head south, we discover small towns where people drive ATVs on the roads. Every day feels like a weekend in northern Maine. As we approach the coastline, we start to find more and more towns and population, eventually reaching the coast of Maine, where beautiful towns that depend on sea life. We are now driving south along the eastern seaboard, where fresh lobster is the staple of the cuisine. In this northern part of our trip, we discover a vast influence of French cultures, visible in the ethnicity, cuisine, and culture of the region. As we enter Portland, Maine, we discover a beautiful town overlooking the water with somewhat of a serious homeless and crime problem. That does take a little bit of the beauty away, but Portland is still a beautiful town and absolutely a gem of an American city despite the many challenges it's facing. Portland is also now the new home to many migrants who are coming to the United States, many of Haitian background. This area revolves solely around the opportunity to enjoy some of the most beautiful coastal scenery in the United States. The coast of New Hampshire is small, but it's definitely worth seeing. Here, New Hampshire vibes, a beautiful coastline, gorgeous beaches with rocky shores. Said to be some of the best beaches to metal detect in North America, we definitely gave it a try and found a pair of sunglasses. Boston, Massachusetts is the largest city we encounter heading south at this point of our trip. Here, we're plagued with traffic, congestion, and one of the most busy cities in the United States. After so many scenic and small towns, to enter Boston, a congested city, is just a reminder of the quarter of large cities that is now before us as we head south, Boston being the first large city on this tour. Boston is a significant place for American history, and here we discovered some of the many relics of U.S. history that we all read about in school. We cross over into Rhode Island, Providence. With its slower-paced lifestyle, it's a relief after driving through Boston. The food scene here is incredible, with a large Puerto Rican, Dominican, and other Caribbean nations living here. We find ourselves enjoying a city that has some of the best cuisine along the Northeast. Whether you enjoy Peruvian food or Caribbean food, Providence is a great place to switch up the regional culinary customs and try something a little bit more unique. We found a home in the outskirts of Providence that is said to be the original Family Guy neighborhood. Quahog, an imaginary place, is actually based off a small suburb on the outskirts of Providence. Family Guy is just one of the many American television staples that we run across on our tour along the East Coast. We discover New London, Connecticut. Here in Connecticut, we find a large Puerto Rican and Dominican community, as well as a beautiful town. Despite the fact that New London is a small town, some of the buildings and architecture here are actually more befitting of a large city. Despite its small size architecturally, this has to be one of the most underrated cities in North America. While most people consider Connecticut to be somewhat of a bland state, we actually discovered that the coast of Connecticut has small gems, like the small town of Clinton, Connecticut, where we had some of the best lobster rolls we've ever had. You'll discover that the small towns and communities along the coast of Connecticut are actually very beautiful places with unique architectural styles, large trees, and a very calm setting. Connecticut is also home to large cities like New Haven, where you'll find a downtown, busy highways, busy streets. City life is definitely visible here as well. And as we leave Connecticut and head towards New York City, the roads get busier, and eventually we'll find ourselves in New York City. We start off our tour in Washington Heights. Dominicans are the largest ethnicity in this neighborhood. The beauty of New York City is that every neighborhood has a different ethnic composition, and New York City really is a representation of the entire globe, with each neighborhood representing a different ethnicity. It is something unlike anything else in the world. You may have heard that New York City is a dangerous place, but you'll find that even Washington Heights, a neighborhood with some of the worst reputation, is a fairly safe and busy area throughout the day and even into the night. Despite the negative news coverage that New York City receives, it is actually one of the safest cities in the United States, with a very low homicide rate, lots of cameras and security. In fact, if you're not used to driving in New York City, you can actually expect to get several tickets in the mail, as they have speeding cameras in all directions. We saw neighborhoods like Bedford, where Biggie is originally from. Really, New York City has so many ethnic enclaves of different cultures that there's not really enough time to discover every last one of them. Many visitors to New York City for the first time focus on Manhattan, but the real beauty of New York City is seeing all the particular neighborhoods that compose this incredible city, each one having their own unique ethnic composition, neighborhood vibes, architectural styles. There's so much to soak in New York City. We're now cruising through Queens. Here I received a speeding ticket with one of the many cameras that are posted along this boulevard. You'll find that New York City really is a place of law and order, where even driving a few miles over the speed limit will get you a ticket in the mail. The city is covered with cameras, security, and surveillance, and it really is one of the most safe cities you can find yourself. We also rode all the way down to Coney Island. New York City is known for being a boastful and loud city. Here, the online celebrity of Gorilla Nems has given this neighborhood an online fame for his interesting and somewhat grotesque social media posts of his interactions with people on the streets. He's also a musical artist. There really are endless possibilities to explore New York City, with so many different neighborhoods that have so much culture going on. It really is clearly one of the most incredible places in all North America to discover a city that represents literally the entire world. We cross over into Staten Island, an interesting part of New York City. It's a little bit less congested here. Many of the people that currently live on Staten Island used to live in Brooklyn, but Brooklyn was mostly bought out by a large and growing Asian community. Many of the Italians that are originally from Brooklyn are now currently in Staten Island. Others have dispersed to other parts of the country. Many of these Italians profess that they really regret the fact that they sold their properties in Brooklyn, lost their neighborhood, which has now lost its previous ethnic composition of Italians, and is now mostly represented by Asians. Interestingly enough, when you sell your neighborhood out to somebody that pays more, you lose it. It's no longer yours. And many people really regret the fact that they lost their stronghold in Brooklyn and are now dispersed through Staten Island or other parts of Florida. These communities really sold out to the interests of the higher paying customer. You can really sense the disdain of these Italian communities for the new and growing Asian communities, despite the fact that they bought these properties with cash money. It's not like they stole them. We're crossed over into New Jersey, where traffic congestion can be very complicated. I think New Jersey is called the Garden State for a reason. Unfortunately, many of us will never get to see the gardens of New Jersey. All we get to see are the packed highways. And let's not forget the infamous toll roads. You're literally paying every square inch of road you use. We didn't see any Jersey cows, but we did see a lot of traffic. The streets of Hoboken are gorgeous, overlooking the New York City skyline. One of my favorite places to stay in New York City is actually on the New Jersey side, where you can overlook the entire New York City skyline from New Jersey. Hoboken used to be a neighborhood that had a bad reputation many years ago, but today the real estate prices here are insane, and it really has become a place of nothing more than absolutely wealthy people because of its proximity to the New York City skyline. What was once a dangerous neighborhood is now a lively and safe place where people venture out at night in a neighborhood that perhaps many years ago had a horrendous reputation. But of course, the proximity to New York City has made Hoboken today be an exclusive address. You can literally see the entire New York City skyline from here. It's an amazing place. We cross over into Philadelphia, another staple of American history. The reality of the streets of Philadelphia is a really sad one. Philadelphia has one of the highest overdose death rates of any American city, and despite the city being historical and beautiful, as well as contributing greatly to American culture, it is still a city that has a lot of problems. Named a city of brotherly love, it is far from it. While many other large American cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York get a horrible reputation on social media, you'll find that Philadelphia is one of those cities that is actually horrendous, yet nobody ever talks about how bad it is. It just doesn't get the same media attention, but you'll find Philadelphia to be one of the most disturbing large cities in America, and despite all the great cultural and cuisine that the city has to offer, it really is a beautiful city historically. The reality of the streets of Philadelphia is that it's a sad drive through the city. You'll get to see some of the most sad human misery here that you'll see anywhere in North America on a massive scale. Sadly, Philadelphia, its past and its beauty and its importance in American history is overshadowed by the fact that the city today has become nothing more but a giant open window into the world of misery and misfortune. Philadelphia is sadly a sad reminder of the American failures that we're facing today. We hop on down to Baltimore, the next large city, also a city plagued with the exact same problems: addiction, violence, crime. Baltimore is perhaps now one of the most rundown cities in America. You'll see buildings are empty, graffitied out, boarded up, and just left in abandonment. As today the city of Detroit sees a revival, it's quite possible that Baltimore is now the most abandoned and run down of all the large cities in the United States. While the metropolitan area has high incomes and great opportunities, Baltimore really is a failure. And I think it's an unfair failure because if you look at the entire metropolitan area, the entire area of Baltimore, there are pockets with high income and great analytics. Unfortunately, all of the bad is centered around Baltimore's city limits. You'll see people even blowing stop signs in the daytime, afraid to stop at a red light. Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. What's interesting about D.C. is that they have a building height regulation because of the monuments of the city. They want to preserve the historic and very important, significant buildings. Thus, they have a height regulation that limits how tall buildings can be. What this has led to has to be one of the ugliest urban landscapes of anywhere in America. You'll notice that in Washington, D.C., all the buildings are square and they're all about the same height, making it one of the least aesthetically appealing cities that you'll find everywhere. It literally feels like every building here is a box. A building that should have been taller, but because of restrictive building codes couldn't be. Washington, D.C. has to be one of the ugliest urban landscapes in America. We move on to Richmond, Virginia. Interstate 95 continues to drag us to large cities, and this is finally one of the last urban cores that we're going to drive through on our drive through 95 heading south. We're now leaving the busy corridor of the Northeast and coming to areas that are somewhat more southern. Montgomery was the capital of the Confederacy, but there were plans to make it Richmond, Virginia. Of course, with the decline of the South during the Civil War, that really didn't take place. But you are now entering the South, leaving behind the busy cities of the Atlantic Northeast and moving into an area that seems somewhat more in tune with the South, despite its proximity to the Atlantic Northeast. Wilmington, North Carolina. The TV show One Tree Hill will continue the theme of visiting towns that are important in American television. We are now entering the South, and Wilmington does have a southern charm. You'll find the beaches here to be exquisite. You'll find the town to be gorgeous, historical, beautiful, monumental, and of course your wife will rave on endlessly about the One Tree Hill was filmed here in the studio. And then, women always talking about One Tree Hill. I don't give a crap about One Tree. Why are women always talking about this TV show anyways? A little further inland, you'll discover places like White Lake, North Carolina. These are inland beaches and just kind of more secluded areas to enjoy nature. Of course, you have the beautiful Carolina coast, but a little bit further inland, there are little gems to discover, this being one of them. We enter South Carolina, Myrtle Beach, aka Murder Beach. These are the famous American tourist towns. These are the spring break capitals, the places where the youth go to every spring to act a complete fool in public. These are beach vibe types of places, very similar to Panama City Beach or Daytona, places that people go simply to party. And while this beach is a fun place to visit, many people who visit here tell me that the vibe feels somewhat violent. And it is kind of a hectic place to be. But places like Myrtle Beach, despite the fact there's just a place to vacation along the water, let's not forget the importance that this is where many of the youth make incredible memories of a lifetime. Spring break alone, an American tradition for the youth, is taking place in places like this. And the tourism along the South Carolina coast has actually became somewhat of an influx of people now moving to the outskirts of Myrtle Beach. These are now among the fastest growing cities in the United States. These coastlines also have small towns like Georgetown. More primitive and rustic than their counterparts directly on the water, these are still somewhat coastal communities where you can enjoy a more calm setting, coastal vibes, really southern elegance. An important place along the coast of the United States, Fort Sumter, where the Civil War kicked off. You'll find many monuments of the Confederacy, and much of the South's elegance is still in proud hold here. Beautiful bridges cross beautiful waterways, historic buildings, and of course, the southern elegance that denotes this region. Whether you are in Charleston or many of the other coastal communities in this region of South Carolina, you'll definitely notice that tourism is important. Cities like Charleston, Savannah, Georgia, and many other cities along this coastline are some of the most beautiful cities along the Atlantic East Coast seaboard, and here, the South's history, culture, many historic monuments, and places of important historic value are on display for the tourists to enjoy. In many of the places in the deep South, these towns are pretty much neglected and in horrible condition, but you'll find that here along the coast of South Carolina, these historic monuments and the towns adjacent to them are in a much better condition. They've devoted themselves to preserving the history in a fashion that is attractive to tourism. The charm and beauty of places like Charleston really connect the South to the North, and even with the palm trees, somewhat into the colonial era. All this comes into play, creating one of the most beautiful scenic settings anywhere in the South. And the economical opportunities that come from this tourism are again leading to more development along the coast of South Carolina's coast, with good infrastructure, great general location, mild weather, and beautiful scenic places of historic value. All that is making the South Carolina coast boom. And there are beaches here that enjoy mild weather, calm settings, somewhat of an elegant vibe. One of my favorite places along the coastline is Hilton Head. It reminds me a lot of Marco Island, somewhat of a serene natural setting, coastal calmness. This is really a unique area, not only for its waterways, but the area really enjoys a calm and serene setting difficult to find nowadays. We cross over into Georgia and we find Savannah, another beautiful and charming southern city. Just like South Carolina, Georgia's smaller coast is also seeing a lot of growth and development as well as tourism. This area has taken full advantage of its beautiful coastal waterways as well as its pristine nature. Islands like Cumberland attract tourism and give people a taste of a coastline that is still underdeveloped. However, as the area continues to grow, this limited coastline that Georgia has is starting to see a lot of pressure from development. Along Interstate 95, you'll start to see a lot of growth, development, and subdivisions. And many of the people that are endemically from this area and have ties to the region, like the Geechee, are finding that perhaps this encroachment from outsiders is going to wear away the area's native significance and replace it with an outside element. Here in Savannah, Georgia, you'll also find beautiful large bridges, a staple of this region. Going further inland into Georgia, you'll find small towns like Jessup and Woodbine that are somewhat forgotten in time. Now, Georgia was the end of the English colonial empire. Crossing the St. Mary's River will put you into Florida, which was Spanish-occupied territory. This is the end of the English Empire. We've been through the French, we've been through the English, and we are now at the end of the colonial English Empire. We're going to be crossing into Florida, where we will find a much heavier Spanish influence. The small town of St. Mary's, Georgia is right on the Florida-Georgia boundary. Here you can see Florida across the water. A significant battle took place here as the Spanish had freed and runaway slaves living among them in Florida. that the English in Georgia wanted to capture, which led to many wars between Florida and Georgia. During the time of the Spanish and English rule in North America in the infancy of the United States, we leave behind this region of Georgia and we find ourselves in Fernandina Beach on the outskirts of Jacksonville. Despite the fact Florida isn't known for being as historical and as populated as many of the other places along the East Coast, this is a unique gem in Florida. You'll see large oak trees, historic buildings, coastal vibes. It really feels like this particular region of Florida belongs further north along the Atlantic coast. This area, however, despite being in Florida, definitely has a more northern Atlantic vibe. The first claims to this region of Florida are disputed between the Spanish with St. Augustine and the French and Fort Caroline. However, what is clear is that the Spanish had grandchildren in this region of Florida before the English made their first settlement in New England, making this coast of Florida the oldest coastline to be settled by Europeans anywhere in North America. La Florida could have meant the flowers, or it could have also meant Easter, since that was the time of the year when the Spanish discovered Florida. Regardless of the name's original origin, what is not disputed is that Florida was the first place that Europeans made a settlement in North America, and this claim upsets people in New England who would like to proclaim that the English were in North America before the Spanish, but history does not lie. In St. Augustine is the Castillo de San Marcos, one of the most incredible places of American national monuments that you'll find anywhere in North America. And to be fair, the coast of Florida from Pensacola to the Florida Keys, Fort Jefferson as far north as St. Augustine, is nothing but the relics of the Spanish Empire, as well as American forts from the Civil War. Despite the fact that Florida was a Confederate state, many of the forts and fortifications along the outskirts of Florida's islands were actually manned by the Union forces. Choking off Florida was an important aspect to the Civil War, as connections to the Caribbean island were bringing in rum and supplies into the South. Being blocked from the north, the South was the clear entry point for many of the supplies needed in the South during the Civil War. Florida has always been uniquely different. With its Spanish influence, it is still distinct from all the other states we've talked about because this was more of a Spanish colony than it was an English colony. While the coast of St. Augustine is charming, quaint, and historical, as you move further south, you'll discover Daytona Beach, another spring break destination, another party animal. Daytona Beach still continues to be a party city. It has mellowed out significantly over the last few years. With its coastline being very hard-pressed sand, you'll find that there's even places where you can drive on the beach here. But we're going to leave behind the firm sands of Daytona Beach and the yellow sands of St. Augustine and keep moving south towards Melbourne Beach. Here, finally, the sand softens up a little bit, giving it a more scenic appeal. Now, so far along this coast, the water has been murky, but eventually, as we keep moving further south into South Florida, the waters will lighten up, and we'll not be looking at waterways like this that are murky, but clear and tropical. But it is here, somewhere around Melbourne Beach, where you start to see touches of tropical South Florida, royal palm trees and coconut trees, a new vegetation taking place. As we move further south into Florida, we discover that now the vegetation has become tropical, the ocean has become emerald green. Leaving behind a somewhat Mediterranean climate, we start to see the vegetation and the weather start to look more subtropical. Melbourne Beach and Merritt Island are really the breaking points along the east coast of Florida, where you'll notice the vegetation change drastically. You'll see now that you're entering tropical South Florida. In Fort Pierce at the Yeti, we find local anglers going after snook, tarpon, and even shark. Even the fishing here is different now. We are entering a place of complete beauty. From here, moving further south, real estate prices appreciate as the warm weather attracts snowbirds during the winter. And we find here Fort Pierce, perhaps one of the last affordable places along the coast of Florida as we cross into Palm Beach County, where real estate prices go through the roof. Here, it is the coconut tree that is predominant. These are the second homes of some of the wealthiest people in North America. You'll find individuals of prestige and name will have properties here for their summertime vacancy and their wintertime enjoyment. Snowbirding is a huge aspect of life in this part of Florida. In the summer, when the heat and humidity cranks up, most of these people go back up north to their main residences, leaving this area looking somewhat like a ghost town. However, in December, January, when the cold weather strikes and snow and ice covers America, this southern tip of Florida is warm and sunny, and that is why the real estate values here along these coastlines are some of the highest anywhere in the United States. The island of Palm Beach being an exclusive enclave of some of the most expensive real estate anywhere on the continent. Resorts along the coastline here can easily exceed $1,000 a night if they have a water view. These prestigious venues also held events like weddings, parties, and in fact, this is where the wealthy of America go for those few months when the rest of the country is too cold to enjoy. However, the residents of this area that are full-time suffer an economical dependency on a limited time of the year, while throughout the summer, work is hard to come across. Tourism and many sources of income dry up, and the streets look something like a ghost town. But it is here, in this time of year, when the locals can enjoy traffic-free roadways and perhaps beaches that are not crowded. Lively and vibrant during the winter, and a complete ghost town in the summer, that is the changing accordion of life in South Florida. Fort Lauderdale, considered to be one of the most liberal cities on the East Coast, this is also another hub for tourism. People from all over the world come here to enjoy some of the beautiful cultural aspects of the area, warm weather, beautiful beaches, and of course, clear water. The coastline of Fort Lauderdale continues to be one of the most fun destinations of anywhere in North America. An elegant city of waterways, Las Olas, some of the most beautiful resort-type areas in the entire state of Florida. Elegant but not prestigious, not presumptuous. Fort Lauderdale has the wealth, has the money, but it doesn't have the same snotty attitude as you'll find in Palm Beach County. It's more laid back, more chill, more hipster vibes. Fort Lauderdale also contributes greatly to the culture of Florida and its identity. But we now find ourselves in Miami Beach. This is the end of the mainland in the United States. This is the tropical paradise of movie stars. Many people refer to it as a Scarface vibe. This place has always had a lawless nature to itself. Home of the Cuban exile community, Miami really feels like the capital of Latin America, with representations of Cuba, Haiti, and many other Caribbean and Latin American countries. Miami is a fun place to be. But we end our journey in the Florida Keys. The islands, one single road, one way in, one way out. In the summer, this place is completely dead. In the winter, you can't even find a parking spot. Here, you almost feel like you have left North America and you've entered the Caribbean nations. You are now in a completely tropical environment. I hope you guys have enjoyed this journey from Canada to the Florida Keys, exploring the east coast of the United States, from French Canada, English Northeast, the South ending in tropical Florida, the Florida Keys, tropical islands near the Caribbean.